Okay, so I'm back. I thought I'd start telling you just a little bit about where I was and what was happening, because I was at Geshe Zopa's Deer Park Center, which is outside of Madison, Wisconsin. And Geshe-la has been one of my teachers since 1977. So there's a very close connection, and I've gone back there every year since 1998, except 2 years, to take part in the summer program. And the reason I go is because the kind of teachings that are offered there are very difficult to get in English, especially in the US, okay? Because Geshe-la's going into some of the philosophical texts about emptiness. Of course, it's not just philosophical, it's meant for your meditation, yeah? But it's difficult to get those teachings in English for a few reasons. First is because the vocabulary is difficult, and there aren't, not all the texts are even translated. And second, amongst Westerners, not so many people are interested in that. If they are interested in the philosophical things, they often go to universities where they're learning from professors. But kind of in general Dharma centers, people tend more to want something that is practical, and initially practical. And learning about emptiness, it's practical, but you have to really do a lot of thinking and understand things from a bunch of different perspectives and go really deep into looking at, well, how actually do things exist? And you have to use reasoning and focus a lot. And so it's the kind of teaching that really requires a lot of energy and persistence. And you often feel more confused at the end of it. Yeah, and so, a lot of times that isn't what the general public is going to go for. And then also, finding teachers of this kind of caliber to teach this is very difficult, because it's stuff that they've studied in the monasteries for years and years and debated for years and years. So it's not just, any monk that you find that can give this caliber of teachings. So Geshe Zopa is, really exceptional, very, very well respected, and was teaching the summer course up until 2 years ago. And he's now 90, he was 88 then, and he taught the first few days of the course, and then he said, I'm old and I'm not going to be able to teach anymore. And his student, Jangse Chögyé Rinpoche, who was in line to be the Ganden Tripa, the head of the Gelug order, was there, and he kind of gave us en masse to Jangse Chögyé and said, he's your teacher now, and you take care of them. Yeah, and so Jangse Chögyé Rinpoche taught the rest of that course. Yeah, and then he taught last year, and then this year also he taught. And he's really an exceptional teacher. Very learned, but extremely kind. And the teachings are really clear. They're difficult, so the muddledness is in our own mind, but the way he's explaining things is really very clear. And he had some visa problems, and there were visa problems, there were Indian paper problems, because he's on refugee status. So he was delayed in coming for a while. So he arrived a week and a half into the teachings, and they had another Geshe Dorji who kindly, took over and taught. And then the translator also didn't show up. Nobody knows where that person is. And so for the first week, Venerable Jampa did her very, very best, and it was a real challenge for her to translate. And then the second week, John Newman, who's also been here, he came and did it. But we were studying from Nagarjuna's Karikas, the treatise on the middle way. Also, it's called Root Wisdom. So this is Nagarjuna's really famous text where he just taught about emptiness and completely blasted all the people who were, you know, grabbing onto phenomena as having some kind of essence. And so it's a text with 27 chapters, and Jason Kappa wrote a commentary to it that's, you know, this big. So we studied chapter 26. You know, this is an order that was recommended by His Holiness. If you can't study the whole text, he said start with chapter 26, which talks about the 12 links, because that chapter really shows you why it's important to understand emptiness. Because when you study the 12 links and you realize this is the story of my life and lives, it's really kind of scary, you know, to think that I'm caught in this kind of cycle, and this is the nature of my being, and how important it is to get out, and that the ignorance grasping at inherent existence is the root of the whole thing. So we need the wisdom that realizes that inherent existence doesn't exist at all to get out. Yeah, so the chapter 26 really gives you the background and the motivation. And then he took us to chapter 28, which is on self and phenomena, and so that is going into great depth about the view of the personal identity, always also translated as view of the transitory collection or view of the perishing aggregates, or just jigta is the Tibetan term for it. But that's, you know, the aspect, the mental factor in our own mind that thinks of ourself as some real, solid, concrete, truly existent person that's really here. And of course, when you have that kind of feeling of there's a real me, then everything that gives me pleasure becomes very important, and everything that gets in my way becomes something to destroy. So we get attachment, we get aversion, we compare ourselves to others, so we get jealousy when we come out less than somebody else, we get conceit when we come out better than somebody else. You know, so this jigta, this view of the personal identity, is the real troublemaker. So this was a whole chapter on this mental factor and how the way it apprehends, the way it grasps phenomena, specifically us, you know, the I and the mind, how it grasps the I and the mind in a totally erroneous way. So we went into a lot of depth about how it holds the I to exist, and if the self were inherently existent the way that this mental factor thinks it is, then it would have to be inherently one with the aggregates, inherently separate from the aggregates, and going into that whole reasoning. So that was chapter 18. Then we did chapter 24, which is on the Four Noble Truths. And that chapter starts out with somebody who's grasping at inherent existence saying, you guys, you know, Majjhimicans have it all wrong, you know, because you say things are empty of inherent existence, so you totally went to the extreme of nihilism and nothing exists whatsoever. So, you know, you're saying there's no causality, and if there's no causality, there's no Four Noble Truths, and if there's no Four Noble Truths, there's no Sangha who realizes them, and there's no Dharma jewel, because the Dharma jewel is the last two of the Four Noble Truths, and then there's no Buddha, and so your whole system falls apart. This is what the opponent starts out the chapter saying. And then Nagarjuna steps in and says, actually, you know, all the things you're telling us we got wrong pertain to you, because you're accepting inherent existence, and if things inherently existent, all these faults would happen and nothing could exist, nothing could function. And then he goes into this big long explanation about, you know, just what emptiness is, and it includes I mean, some very interesting topics. There's a big section about the two truths, which Guy Newland has taught here, you know, and then it talks about, yeah, just a lot of interesting topics, but it's really juicy, chapter 24. So we covered those 3 chapters in 4 weeks, yeah, with 4 hours of teaching a day. So it was pretty intense. Yeah, but it's wonderful, and I feel really, you know, very privileged to have that kind of teaching. There was a verse in There's a verse in Aryadeva, who was a disciple of Nagarjuna, in his text, the 400, where he says people of little merit don't even think about these kinds of things, let alone have the opportunity to hear those teachings. So Geshe-la was saying that, you know, at least we have some merit because we were able to come, you know, that these teachings are hard. They're what Geshe Zopa calls chewing hard bones. Yeah, but he said you had some merit because you were able to come here and listen to those teachings. And so now you have to really put some energy in to study them and reflect on them and discuss them and meditate on them. And you need to hear them many times. It's a difficult topic. It's not going to be clear the first few times, you know. But you had the merit to hear it. And Aryadeva also says that if you begin to question how things exist and question who you are, that already is starting to tear our cyclic existence to tatters. Yeah, so he's saying you're on your way. You know, there's a long way to go, but you're on your way. And I really felt that way very much, you know, that it was, you know, I was quite, yeah, I felt very privileged to be able to be there. Because there were only 35, 40 of us for these teachings, given by, you know, one of the most well-respected Tibetan lamas. Yeah? You know, and somebody was pointing out how Geshe Zopa, you know, has been teaching for years, I mean, since the 60s there. And he would explain these texts, and he'd always get to the chapter on wisdom, and then he'd stop. You know, because people just didn't have, they weren't prepared yet. They didn't have the merit, they didn't have they weren't receptive enough to be able to really benefit. So he didn't give those wisdom teachings until in 1998 he really started, when he went into the chapter on insight in Je Tsongkhapa's great treatise. Yeah. So I think that's what I'll tell you for today, and then and then tomorrow I'll tell you some more. Okay?